In an increasingly polarized world, how does Russia today approach building global narratives and challenging Western perspectives and Western dominance?
Hello. For decades, Western mass media was creating the narrative, was monopolizing the narrative. We all got the picture of what's going on in the world, taking it from the Western media, even here in Global South. It's not only about what is said in Western media, but also without what is not said at all. For example, Ukrainian crisis. It's all over the place in Western media. It's like dominating the topic. But if you look several years ago, the Iranian protests were nowhere there. Or, for example, the Yemen bombing was nowhere. The Iranian protest was all over the place in Western media. But at the same time, the Yellow Vest protests in France were barely mentioned. So RT was always on the front line, trying to challenge these narratives. Julian Assange was hosting our program long before he was sadly imprisoned by the combined efforts of US and UK. RT was one of the first international channels who said about US boots on the ground in Syria, and we were there on the ground in Libya when the Arab Spring uprising happened, and we predicted all the chaos and terrible deaths that this NATO-led operation would leave. I think that's very important to challenge this narrative, and I would like to touch upon the issue, which is very unusual for RT, but I think that is one of the most misunderstood and misinterpreted issue. I'm talking about diversity. We in RT think that there is a huge lack of diversity in media. You would fairly argue that diversity is one of the main concerns of the Western media. They talk about it daily. They have even compounds addressing this issue, HR compounds. But we on RT think that it's some sort of, this conversation about diversity is some sort of a window dressing. Because if you turn on the RT competitors from the Western media, you will see and listen to them carefully. You will see they're okay. They represent all the letters in LGBT. They are all colors. They are all age, women and men, whatever you see. They are very diverse. But if you listen to them, you will notice that they say almost the same things. Because they share the same opinion. They had the same university they studied in. They were shaped by the same liberal dogma. And this is not the true diversity. So what do we on RT see it as a diversity? When I'm talking about diversity, I'm talking about different cultural backgrounds, about different ethic and moral upbringing, about different perspectives from the world and different voices that we can hear. Just a small example. I'm just turning back to Arab Spring uprising. When the Arab Spring uprising happened, there were like multiple people of all races, ages, and gender identities who were telling one thing. They were telling that it's good to protest against your government, that Western-style liberal democracy is equally good both for US and Libya. And we all know how it's all ended. It's all ended in chaos and like thousands of deaths. Just to show you the picture of what I'm telling about, I just wanted to show you, one picture. It's a caricature by BBC. Unfortunately, you can't see it, but I will just tell you what's going on here. So the BBC shows someone who they think is a representative of the Brahman caste. They think it's him. And he's literally capturing what they think is a modern woman who is striving for her rights. And she has a sign in her hands. It says, "Smash Brahminical patriarchy." So I would say that this picture would never show up on RT, not because we agree or disagree with the amount of rights women should have in India, but because we are not in a position to judge. We're not here to lecture India what rights the women should have or not have. We just report the news from the ground. And this is our main core. We give people of the nations we are broadcasting the force to find the story, to pitch the story, to say this story is adequate or not. This year we are launching RT India. It's a big, big event for us because India is our main market, because 500 million viewers watch RT in India. And we do it very carefully, with humility, because we know that cultural history of India is more than 4,000 years. And you don't need our lecture. You need the very careful approach for us. And that's when we stand on. We want to speak your language. That's primarily everything I would like to say.
You made some very, very interesting points about lack of diversity in media, especially Western media. We've seen that in the aftermath of the attack in Kashmir, where the West has consistently called the attackers militants or gunmen and so on, and that's a point well taken. Let me bring this to Anand Goenka. You are a promoter, you lead a brand that is one of the most credible, not just in India, but around the world. And this is a brand that has built a name for itself in investigative journalism. How important is that brand of journalism in today's world where fake news abounds? How important is it? How important is independent journalism in shaping the world's perception of a country like India?
I really think that it's everything. I think it's such an incredible statement of confidence to have and to promote a thriving newsroom which is able to be critical of its own government, of its own centers of power. And I think there's really no stronger statement than that, stronger statement of strength and stronger statement of confidence. I think that there is, the idea of independent journalism itself now, I think there is a lot of, I feel there's not enough passion for it in the audience. And I wonder why. I feel like the kind of stuff that Express has done, whether it's the 20,000 crores we recovered after Panama Papers, whether it's, the investigation we did about China, watching and all the people that China was kind of, that hacked and all the people that China was kind of keeping a close look on in India. There's just so many things that we have done. The kind of stuff that you mentioned, I think it's not Russia's today's job maybe to be as critical about India and what's happening in India as it is our own journalism's job, and that's really what I think is, crucial for us. I think, if you ask me, Ashok, correct me if I'm wrong, I think the biggest fake news of this century came when Colin Powell stood up in the UN and said they found weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. That was one of the biggest global political offices in the world, right? When that said that. So you need independent journalism to check that. So I honestly, I can't imagine there being a stronger statement of confidence than promoting and having a thriving independent journalistic environment.
And no bigger proof of how India is the place where all kinds of opinion, all sorts of journalistic people with all sorts of leanings find a place. Look at the panel, look at the people being represented on this platform. And I'll come to you on the point of why journalists or people are not watching investigative reports. I think that's an important one too for us in the media. But Ashok Malik, if I could bring you into this conversation, as you've been listening to two people who lead newsrooms, how important are narratives in shaping the world's view of a country, and not just in terms of perception? I mean, this also has an economic dimension. This also has a security and strategic dimension. Is it time for us to accept that the media is now a strategic asset? It is not just a tool to inform people.
Quite honestly, it was always a strategic asset, whether owned by governments or whether owned by corporate interest or whether owned by, frankly, even a common sense of a certain left liberal community, for instance, which tended to dominate media. I'm not making a value judgment there, I'm just stating a fact. Does it affect how business decisions? Frankly, it does, and smart businesses are increasingly coming to realize that they can't necessarily depend on just one person's report in one newspaper in New York or London or frankly even Delhi or Singapore on an entire country. I'll give you two examples here. One, when an Indian journalist goes to, or for that matter, a Saudi journalist goes to America to study the politics of America, he or she is expected to understand the differences between the motivations of a voter on the East Coast and a voter in the Midwest. So the distance between Boston and Minnesota is like a universe, he or she is told. And you need to understand this if you need to get America. What happens when a journalist from the West comes down to our part of the world? Everything from Dubai to Morocco, which is from the Arabian Sea to the Atlantic Ocean, is the Arab street. Everything. There is sweeping generalization there, which is not even recognized as sweeping generalization. In terms of the economic impact or the impact on economic decision making, smart investors, smart business people are beginning to look for sources of information beyond media. Frankly, I work for a business consultancy here in Delhi. If the media were perfect, I wouldn't exist. I wouldn't have a job. I had one person coming to tell me, someone who flew down from the US for the first time he came to India. He came via Dubai, so Dubai airport, and then came to Delhi airport. He had flown in from Washington, from Dulles airport. He said, reading newspapers in the US, you don't realize how the airports of Asia are actually way better than the airports we have in America. The media just hasn't captured, I'm not saying the media needs to cover airports, but it needs to cover economic change. And that's simply not adequate.
Anand, do you want to take this? That it is also our job to tell the world about what our country is doing right, as much as it is our job to tell our country and our government what they're not doing right.
Of course. And it's surprising that this is even something that we have to debate about. Like, of course, that's our job. We have to call out government and we have to celebrate all the things that are good. Let's take the flip, right? I can bring up Singapore. It's a place that free speech and press is quite is very different from how we see in parts of other parts of the world and parts of Asia. It is so predictable. If you read any news, if you pick up the biggest paper in Singapore, let's name it. Let's name the Straits Times, right? Your first page, what's good in Singapore. Second page, what's bad in Malaysia. Third page, how Singapore better than Malaysia. And it's become so predictable that you've lost the audience. And where's the audience going? The audience is going to international press because they don't have a local press that's catering to what they want. Or they're going to go and talk to, if there is a bigger investor position, they'll go and talk to people like Ashok. I think we have to celebrate, we have to question, but we have to do it all. I think the problem with media is that we are picking a side. I think a problem in American media, and we're all spending a lot of time talking about Western media, not in great light, that's fine, but I also don't know why we keep looking up to them to give any direction, or we keep looking up to them to kind of set the standard. Yes, they might have the largest valuations as journalistic industry, but given India's diversity, I think, news, content, really India should be India does in fact have the experiments that should be setting an example for the world. I think American media has made the mistake of choosing sides. Every brand, every channel, and it's created this. It's torn the country over. It's completely torn American society.
If I could have a follow-up, is it better to wear your affiliation on your sleeve, or is it better to pretend to be unbiased and yet everyone has a point of view, and that point of view does sort of come out in the way, the adjectives you use, the words you use, the story that you choose to headline on the front page versus the 10th page?
You need to have a newsroom which has multiple points of view. If you're going to be one person, you're going to, your perspective, your ideology, your positions are going to be, you're going to build an audience around that. I think that there is a shelf life to that audience, because beyond a point you get predictable. I think if you want to talk institution building, and it's very hard in today's date, right? Like earlier, you had the organization's name on the front of the jersey, your name at the back. Now it's the journalist or it's the person's name at the front and the organization's name at the back. But also the shelf life is also getting reduced with that. So if you're talking institution, journalistic institutions, you need to have a plethora of opinions in the newsroom.
Right.
Can I jump in?
Yes, please.
You were saying about it's so boring to read Singapore's newspaper, it's all predictable. But I would like to ask you, when you're watching US media, isn't it predictable? And the Western media? And the second question, you are saying about the independent press. What is this? Well, I would like just to have an example of independent press. Because you were like, there was a question like, is it better to pretend being independent or being independent? Yeah, there is. Yeah, if you ask the young person in UK or US, is CNN or BBC independent, they will laugh. Yeah, because nobody thinks this is independent. Because some like media is not pretending and saying, yeah, we are state controlled. Others are just pretending to be independent. So I think that the whole idea about the independence or objectivity is some sort of a myth. I'm sorry.
I'd like to believe that we thrive in the fact that that's not a myth. I think that the Indian Express has been around now for 90 years. We are growing today as a newspaper. In the year 2025, as a newspaper, we're a growing newspaper. We are a thriving digital platform. Finally, I think we're getting our video strategy right. We have a growing direct audience. I'm not claiming that, you know, that we're ever, like, I don't think I'll ever be flying into waves from Delhi in my private jet. That's not, you know, but I think it's a sustainable business that we have been able to build around exactly what you're saying doesn't exist, which is independent journalism. If you and I will have personal opinions, and there is room for that, right? I think, you know, I'm a bit of a World War buff. I think one of the things that we don't talk about, the World War turned when BBC began broadcasting in German language, right? Because that narrative went to Germany, and that made a difference. There is role for that. But there is also an incredibly distinct role for independent journalism, which honestly keeps the audience guessing also whose side you're on. You actually shouldn't be on anybody's side. You should take a position based on issues. You know, you can support something government did one day. You can be against something government did the next day. As long as you're authentic to your audience, I think that's really our job.
Ashok, is there such a thing as independent journalism anymore?
Look, quite honestly, every media house, every media outlet in these times has a funding process and a financial system to support it. It could be the government, it could be the advertiser, it could be a community, whatever it is. So they are pressures. They've always been pressures. But within that, journalists have attempted to find a fair balance. They've sometimes succeeded, sometimes failed. So I wouldn't go to an extreme and saying there's no such thing as independent journalism. It's a dynamic process. It's a constant churn. You know, one day I could find Express reporting independently. The next day I may change my opinion about it. That's also part of your experience of the media. But there's a broader problem here we've experienced in the past 20 odd years, especially with the coming of the internet. The internet has introduced all of us to this drug, and it's a drug called free content. Okay?
Yeah.
And especially in markets such as India, which never paid for content in the first place, paid huge amounts for content. It's made the business model of media, of serious media, whether it's right-wing or left-wing, and you can have right-wing serious media and left-wing serious media. The Daily Telegraph is a great paper, used to be a great paper. The Guardian is a great paper. They're very different. But you can have papers with a point of view, but still good papers. But the business model of whether it's television channels, whether it's newspapers, whether it's magazines, has just gone for a toss because you simply don't have the revenue now to send out reporters. So you make up for that by having 4 people in a studio, frankly.
Right, and I'll come to the business model in a bit, but I want to get in Lisa here. As journalists, we all operate within certain systems. There are broad editorial guidelines within which we can disagree and debate, but that's what we largely stick to. Then there are other interests at play, to the point that Anant made, that if you're a state broadcaster reaching to a global audience, or if you're any broadcaster for that matter, how do you balance your national interest with your journalistic objectivity?
No. As I said before, I don't trust in objectivity. I think really it's a myth because even by choosing the story, picking up the story, you show subjectivity. Because if you pick one story, don't pick another story, this is subjectivity. Of course, we're trying to be objective, but unfortunately, it hasn't been achieved yet. Turning to the national thing, I would really say that I'm not ashamed to be the part of the Russian TV. And the Indian TV or Indian outlet shouldn't be ashamed to have its own view on everything that is connected to India. And that's the most important thing. And if we're speaking about responsibility in journalism, that's a very important issue, I would say. Because, you know, there is one terrible, I would say, issue that's coming out of my head, is that if you turn on some Western media outlets, you will see one narrative forming issue, a narrative forming pattern, I would say, that such channels, I don't know, BBC, CNN, Sky News, whatever you name it, they pick up the story from anonymous source, from the government or from intelligence agency or from the Minister of Foreign Affairs, but from the respective government. Then the story that came from nowhere, from the anonymous sources, become a news that's being talked about throughout the day on this news outlet. Then the story is being picked up by the publisher or the online media. Then the viewer is being bombarded by different opinions, expertise, and so on. And the story, this so-called news that came out of nowhere, becomes a big topic of the day. Then usually very often this leak turns out to be at least misleading and always sometimes fake. But there is nobody who takes responsibility for this because it's an anonymous source. So you can't name the source. And that's why it's some sort of, something, you can't blame anybody on this and you don't have repercussions. But it wasn't always like this. My colleague has already said then in the beginning of 2000s, Colin Powell was sitting in the UN Security showing the vial of fake evidence just to prove that there is a weapons of mass destruction by Saddam Hussein. Because at that time, US and UK were interested in persuading their people to support the war in Iraq. We know now that this is a lie, but we know how to attribute this lie. We know who created this lie, who disseminated this lie, and who's responsible for this lie. I will give you another example, because I think that during that time, the governments thought that this example could be, was a very bad experience, and they wanted to change the narrative. It's like this. The anonymous sources that are trying to leak into your outlet, and then people don't understand where it came from, but they do think that it's a fact. I'll just, one small example. During the first storm of Trump, there was one story dominated the narrative. Trump was an agent. He sold his loyalty to his country by colluding with Russia. This story dominated everything. This story carried on for 3 years. But the story came out from the dozens, if not hundreds, of anonymous sources. Anonymous sources said they colluded, that they have some proof, and so on. Then there was several investigations. It proved that this story was absolutely conspiracy and fake. But who is responsible for this? Because this story came out of nowhere. Nobody is responsible, and repercussions are hard. Because US and Russia had a terrible time at this time. We absolutely destroyed our relations, and we were as close to the hot war as never in this century. So we on RT decided, we made a decision that we never, or on RT International, we never take stories from the anonymous sources from the government. We always have the stories that can be attributed to the official, to the person on the ground, to somebody who witnessed the story. Otherwise, it's not credible, and that is not responsible to do like that.
Yes, and unfortunately, those stories work very well, so most people would still run it with a question mark. Is Trump an agent? And then say that he's not.
Yeah.
I think
Ashok.
this is a bit of an extreme position. We are conflating several different issues. One, anonymous sources or source-based information is a legitimate media practice. It has been, and Watergate came out of anonymous source, so that's legitimate. Has it been abused? Of course it has, to be sure it has. We are conflating it with something very different in the digital age, which is plain disinformation and propaganda campaigns. So it's, simply saying I'm quoting somebody doesn't make that story less of a propaganda tool. Actually, it might not happen. So we are conflating very different issues here.
Can I just respond, my friend? You know what you were complaining about right now, about misinformation about Trump being an agent? For example, let's just dive deeper into that example. Who's motivated to do that story and give that story distribution enough to catch a wide enough audience?
Those who want Trump to go away.
The media who hates Trump.
Not the media, the powers who want to do it. So it's the powers
But those powers get their eyeballs through media that's supporting that
Yes.
narrative?
Yes.
That is
The
media.
respective
That is
media.
that is media which believes what you're saying, that there is no such thing as objectivity.
Yeah. But
If instead media believed in objectivity, fought for it, wanted to achieve it, however difficult that is,
CNN
they might be more conscious about publishing that fake news about Trump being an agent, and less blinded by their, by their ideology and their hatred towards Trump. So I think again, like the idea of objectivity is really actually coming. If there was a lot of objectivity in media, they would not be taking that story forward.
I'm talking about Western media. I'm not talking about the
Western
media,
media. I'm talking about Western
from
media.
the global South. I'm talking about
Western media. I'm talking about American
I don't
media.
see any examples of existing media who would not be big, influential, who will not be connected to the government, and will not use the anonymous sources to frame their narrative. In fact, I don't know those. If they are striving to be objective, I would call it the other way around. I would call that the truthful and honest reporting is something that gains the attention of millions. You should be very honest. That's very important. But I know what you're talking about. Yes, sometimes in very important moments of our life there are anonymous sources, but when the anonymous sources are used to influence, that's a very difficult, terrible pattern that is being used on huge media giants from the West. That's the problem that I see.
I think the other point is also that not all media is peddling a certain story because of ideological motivation. Sometimes it's just because of viewership, and Trump is a good example. The first time he came to power, I read a study that was conducted later, that because he made such good television and he was so interesting to watch that even the channels and the newspapers that were extremely critical of him gave him a lot of time, a lot of coverage, and so just because of that coverage, Trump became the biggest face of the Republican Party. At one point, 70% of the US media coverage in the 2016 election was on Donald Trump. So the media unwittingly played a role in propelling himself, in propelling Trump to that position. But Anant, you also mentioned something very important, that while platforms like the Indian Express do investigative journalism, do a lot of original storytelling, the audience seems to have shifted.
I think the audience doesn't value it as much as they used to.
I'll finish the question. So is it because you're not, and when I say you, I mean the media, legacy media in general, you're not meeting the audience where they are. They're not bound to consume content the way we choose to present. They may have moved to other platforms, they may have moved to other formats, and we've been late in meeting them there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's absolutely right. I think we haven't been as innovative in the formats, in the storytelling, in the spiffy production. So all that is 100% true, and we have to get there. But I also think a bigger picture, right? Like, I think, suppose we were doing this meeting in 1947, assuming waves happened in 1947, I think you would have had, you probably wouldn't have had an AC room for the meeting, but you would have had a lot of people very passionate about free speech, about the role of free press, about the role of being able to question people in power. I don't know whether that's the case anymore. I don't think people are valuing that lovely right that we have like they used to. I think and I don't understand it. I feel like as people are getting more educated, more affluent, more rich, they're actually losing that value that people fought for to have in India. My grandfather founded the paper. He literally wrote the chapter in the Constitution on free speech, right? And if you see the arguments, that was the one thing that people had consensus on, that we want a place that has that.
If I may add here, I'm not complaining about the audience. We have very good numbers, even if I say so myself. So yes, I think
I'm sorry, I don't.
With due respect, Anant, that's a bit too extreme. I mean, maybe the audience has just become more discerning about what angers it and what doesn't anger it. Maybe a very small, relatively small piece of corruption, all corruption is bad of course, but would anger somebody in India in 1970s, today the threshold is higher. It's quite possible. I don't think people don't value free speech or free opinion. Of course they do. I mean, if they didn't, social media wouldn't be what it is. What's also happening is the way we consume news and information has completely changed.
But
if you really ask me, is the biggest news outlet in India is probably WhatsApp.
100%.
With a lot of disinformation, I agree.
WhatsApp, Instagram, all of that.
So,
which is an opportunity for legacy media, by the way, because that's the biggest source.
Absolutely. So you are the biggest source for all of that. Okay, I completely agree. But which is why people have a multiplicity of media today. So getting up in the morning, reading the Express, and saying, "Damn, this government is bad." Maybe it's changed. They get angry with the government in 100 ways through the day, rather than just.
It's not just government, it's anybody in power, right? I mean, the idea of free speech is there, but I think a different point.
I'll make one last point. A critical media, independent media, objective media, thriving media does not equal always criticizing the government.
I agree
Any
with you.
government.
Yeah.
I totally agree with you.
Criticizing the government. We have 5 more minutes. I want to quickly bring in Lisa here. As the audience is moving in the digital space, as there is a flux of information and disinformation, how does Russia Today reach this younger audience, and how do you shape your strategy also in the face of the kind of censorship that you've seen in the West of late?
Just to what my colleagues have just said, we value freedom of speech most of all. I should say it should be in the center of all our narratives. And of course, social media is one of those places where we thought we'll be absolutely free of censorship. We started social media appearance long ago when we started RT in 2005. We were very, very influential. So our news outlet on YouTube was the biggest news outlet in the world. We had subscribers more than CNN and BBC do altogether. And at that time, we thought that such platforms as Instagram, Facebook, Twitter are just, businesses who are interested in revenue shares and just not interested in politics. But when later on we thought and we saw that it's not like that. Because first of all, we were when we tried to challenge the narratives, the Western narrative, and we saw other people trying to challenge them, we saw that our feed is being shadow banned. So what does it mean? That the algorithm is trying to show you less information that you need to have, yeah? The algorithm is trying to suppress your news feed. And then later on, we were banned altogether on all the social platforms without any explanation, just because, as we understand, because we were not the only one who were banned, just because we are trying to challenge some views that were not in the line of some governments. So anyway, I think that it is important to work there. I think that we still have billions of views in the world trying to overcome these difficulties, and I think that's very important to talk to the younger audience. But I would say still that this idea of independence as objectively is first of all challenged by the young people. There is very low trust to the mainstream media for TV. Now the ratings of these channels, this, are falling because of that, because nobody trusts in objectivity anymore. And after everything that happened to us on the social media, I really don't trust in that the social media do not censor the content. Because, they work as it's convenient for their governments. For example, during the Arab Spring, Facebook and especially Twitter were held as the tool of free speech, and like via the Twitter, many people were gathered and so on. But when it's not convenient, this content is being suppressed. So where is this freedom of speech on social media? I don't understand. But of course, we're trying our best.
Right. We are running out of time, and I feel that we've just gotten started, so I'll give you some time for closing comments. Anant, let's start with you.
No, I think closing comments. I think I just like to close by saying, I hope that I'm wrong. I hope that there is more interest and investment in free speech than I'm kind of maybe being skeptical when I say. But I keep seeing people complaining about all kinds of things, and then they move very happily to Dubai, or they move to Singapore, and then that's. So I think there are things that are more important, So that's one.
More important than the freedom of speech, or more important?
More important than freedom of speech. I think people make that decision. Everybody who's moved out of India and gone to Dubai or Singapore, right? I mean, maybe air quality is more important. I don't blame if you think that way, but I think we have a long way to go, Palki, in terms of catching up with the audience, in terms of formats, in terms of storytelling, the way we speak. I think, if we're very honest, newsroom demographics don't reflect the demographic of the audience. And it's tough if you just do that, because then sometimes you might lose the wisdom and the experience of the vintage of being sort of around in newsrooms for a long time. It's a tough game. It's a very tough game. There are 4,500 newspapers, more than 500 channels. I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of YouTube news stations, how many websites. I think in all of this, my experience is, if we are authentic, if we are trying our best to be as objective as humanly possible, if we are being equally critical as much as celebratory, and if we are equal offenders to all people in power, I believe there's a business model and there's a long-term sustainability for that business model.
Very well put, and I agree. Authenticity will triumph algorithms at some point. Ashok.
Just a couple of lines. In all this, trust the reader, trust the TV viewer, trust the media consumer. She's likely smarter and more discerning than you think.
Good point. And I know that the media is everybody's favorite whipping boy, but and there are challenges and there are problems that we need to fix. But at the same time, I would also urge the audience to ask themselves, what do they reward? Is it an investigative story or a story with a lot of virality, possibly with cats featuring in it? So that's also a point to think. Lisa, final comments.
Final comments is several. I would say that the most important thing in journalism is not pretending, but be honest, without patronizing. Most important thing when you start making the stories from Global South without patronizing, without imposing your values, is very important. I think you were saying something like this. You were asked why Russia Today should report in India. Because we trust we are one of the media that really want people on the ground in India tell their stories, and we will do our best to make it perfect in terms of technology, because this is our goal. This is our goal, is just not to impose narratives and some sort of Western agenda, but to listen to these people living there. For example, just a short example, I'm sorry, I'm just taking your time, but for example, there is absolutely different perception of gay rights in Africa. For example, Uganda does agree with gay rights. South Africa is okay with gay rights. This is the idea. The Africa is back. And we report from Uganda. You should think about Uganda people and listen to them. In South Africa, it's vice versa. So we are not imposing values. We do it vice versa. We ask people on the ground to report the story. That's all.
Right. Very, very interesting points made here. We're completely out of time, but thank you all for being such a fantastic audience, and that gives me that there are takers for what we do. Thank you.